David Fowley of Keeping It Real, we are here for a, dare I say, devilishly delightful discussion about two movies tonight. We're doing a double header here on the Kicking the Seat podcast. We are talking about The Pope's Exorcist, which came out earlier this year in April, and if you can believe it, is already on Netflix. The Russell Crowe movie, and also a 2017 documentary by the late great William Friedkin, who recently passed away, about the subject of the Pope's Exorcist, the real life Father Gabriele Amorth. Who passed away in 2016, pretty much concurrent with the ending of the documentary. Now, David, I got to ask you, what possessed you to want to talk about these films?
Good one. I think I had a curiosity about, Russell Crowe in a possession movie. To be honest, I'm kind of grown tired of the subgenre of possession of, horror movies. But there was something just really oddly curious about, okay, what's Russell Crowe doing in this and what's he doing in this? Um, and, because he's had some very interesting, like, kind of, I'm not going to say late career, but he is getting up there. Choices, and I'm still always, fascinated by, his presence in films. Um, so I did wind up when it came to not in the theaters, but when it came to before it came to Netflix, I think I rented it on Amazon, and I'm like, all right, let's just take this for a walk here, and I I kind of was pretty surprised by it. Sure, it does check off a lot of possession, cliches, but I think it has a wink in its a little gleam in its eye there, about the whole thing.
You know, last week we talked about a movie called Retribution starring Liam Neeson,
We're
another
gonna.
actor who is in a certain stage of his career, shall we say.
Mhm.
Um, and I really stood up for that movie, even though it was, full of cliches and pretty much ticked all the boxes, as you say, of the genre. And we are here this week talking about a film that I think we both agree does the same thing, and yet you're not going to beat up on me for that. For those cliches, because you found something in this that
Yeah,
sort of charmed you and got you through it,
yeah,
much the way that I got through Retribution. So this will be a fun one.
yeah. So basically, what you're saying is we're gonna disagree on this.
Not, not completely. I,
Okay,
I'm
okay.
I'm curious to see what you think of the Friedkin movie, because
Yeah.
here's the thing. I feel kind of the way about the Pope's Exorcist as I did about Blue Beetle, which is that I was kind of indifferent to it. Like
Okay.
I like this more than Blue Beetle.
Okay.
um, because there is that that nod and a wink of Father Amorth, who is the Russell Crowe
Mhm.
character, served as the official exorcist for the Vatican from 1986 until his death in 2016. So a good 30 years. Yeah, I can do math. But it and he's got kind of like an attitude, a swagger. He's this thick Italian accent, and I think Russell Crowe plays the part perfectly. I
Mhm.
almost wish this were a dark comedy rather than just kind of run-of-the-mill exorcism movie with a comedic character sort of at the center.
Yeah, I feel like there is kind of like if you really kind of lean into Crow's take on the character and it's almost like his tone for the performance is almost in a different movie, but he's okay with it. And
Yeah.
so is the director, and so is everybody. It's something to watch, really. And I was totally not expecting that, to just kind of revel in Crow's performance and how much fun he's having. It was his idea to have this whole, uh, you know, uh, scooting around on this red scooter from place to place, going to different exorcism gigs. And once you watch any type of footage about on the real Father Gabriel Amort, whether it be Friedkin's last film or YouTube stuff, or I mean, there's other documentaries on the guy too. I mean, he does he does have, kind of an amiable type of, personality and, disposition, and he is kind of has a wink in his eye too, a sense of humor. But Crow really amplifies that, and it's one of those performances that's like, the type of like, I think Max Zoller cites in his review, mentions that Crow's performance is kind of like those later year performances that you would get from somebody like Kirk Douglas or Burt Lancaster, and maybe even John Wayne, where it's just like, hey, I'm on board with this. I'm gonna somewhat chew the scenery here, and have a good time with it. And Crow, he did his research, on this. I mean, he um, talked to personal friends of Father Amorth who accompanied him on like at least 150 exorcisms. So he's doing his research, and but he's also, I feel like, doing his own kind of take on it too.
Hmm.
So I guess what I'm saying is, you could look at the actual footage. You could look at Friedkin's documentary and see a different type of Father Amorth. But I don't think, I think he's Crow's capturing the spirit, but also he knows what kind of movie this is too. You know what I mean?
And that's the weird bit of it, because I assume that you watched the Pope's Exorcist and
First,
then
yes,
you watched the Freed. I
you did opposite.
figuring I yeah, figuring that might have been the case. I decided to approach it from a different angle. And it's strange because there's the bit where in the documentary, apparently Amort would open every exorcism by literally thumbing his nose at the devil,
Yeah,
like doing this weird, like Patch
yeah,
Adamsy thing,
yeah, yeah.
whatever. I'm like, it's cute, but that is pretty much the only sense that I got of a relationship between that man and whoever Russell Crowe is playing. I feel like Amort was a springboard, and that's where I was thinking a little bit too much, I think, while watching The Pope's Exorcist, because I know it was based on a real guy, but I didn't know if it was based on a real story. I'm assuming that because they uncover the whole story is there's a family that moves into an abbey in Spain, an
Hmm.
American family, a mother and her two, kids, a young, probably 10-year-old boy named Henry, and a teenage daughter named Amy. Kind of the bickering teens that we had in Retribution last week,
Hmm.
with the
Hmm.
beset upon, single parent.
Hmm.
I mean, Liam Neeson wasn't single in that movie, but he might as well have been, because he and his
He was
wife were
solo.
estranged. Yes, he. Oh my gosh, no, he was
My
Qui-Gon. Get
God,
it right.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, but so the family that moves into the abbey, there is some construction work being done to restore it, because they're hoping to restore it and then sell it, which it's kind of weird, but
Okay.
I didn't know there's a giant real estate market for abbeys. But apparently in this construction work, they unleash a demon. Um, and the demon takes over the boy.
Hmm.
Father Mort is eventually called in along with an assistant, and it basically becomes the Exorcist, but with a Vatican conspiracy laid on top of it. I'm going to put up the spoiler banners here
With
just in case anybody cares, but
with
uh,
the great Franco Nero playing the Pope. I mean, I thought that was amazing.
that was that was good, and that went to some places I wasn't expecting, because usually in these kinds of things, maybe I just like have a Sin City hangover, but I expect like, oh, the Pope is in on this conspiracy and all this other business, but it's not. And it's essentially, the idea is everything the Catholic Church has done since the mid 1400s, since the dawn of the Spanish Inquisition, essentially, has been in service of the devil, because the devil took over a friar who influenced the queen, who on and on and on throughout history. And so it's up to Amort and his assistant to save the world by not letting this demon get out, and the demon can possess multiple people, which comes in very handy later, least of all for special effects wise. But yeah, it just kind of becomes a standard exorcism movie with these little bursts of humor, a little bit more gore than I think we're used to seeing in these kind of things. I think this is better than Evil Dead Rise, if that counts for anything. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, I just at some point I kept wondering, was this just the inspiration for this guy led to this character, or is there anything in this that I'm supposed to believe was based in fact? Because if this was a giant conspiracy, I doubt the story would have gotten out, or or
Yeah.
they would have tried to cover it up or something. And
Yeah.
as we know, the church is great at covering things up.
True. I mean, I'm assuming that it could be an amalgam of it. There is definitely some Dan Brown elements to this. I'm assuming it's kind of an amalgam of maybe a lot of different conspiracy theories about the church, but also incorporating some of the real life exorcism stories from a more, and just saying, oh, what if we combine this? And wouldn't it be cool if we adapted this type of thing? And then I just kind of got a kick out of how everything is kind of laid out amid all the cliches or tropes of a possession movie, because it opens up kind of like a Bond film, because
Hmm.
you have you have, I mean, it establishes who the character is, what he does, right? Just kind of like what Bond does, is like there's a one-off exorcism that really has not much to do with the main story, but it's an opener, just like there's a Bond opener. It's before the opening credits. Um, and he shows up at it's like 1985, I think, and he shows up at some village maybe outside of Rome, and there's this once again probably a teenage boy who claims that he's possessed, and Amort's like, claims he's possessed. Okay, yeah, let's see. And and I kind of like that right away we get an idea that, like, here's a guy who's seen a lot. He shows up on his little moped, and with his tools, and we don't see the whole cachet of all those tools, but it's almost like a utility belt, if you will.
Oh yeah.
And it's he has a little moment, a little cute moment with the what we assume to be is the possessed teen boy's young sister. When she's sitting there coloring and everything, is like, do you know the Our Father? Can you say the Our Father? And everybody's saying the Our Father. And then he goes into the room and he's just like, okay. And doing in some of the notes here on the movie, one of the things that Crow picked up on that Amort often did is, um, I guess one of the things that Father Amort picked up in his many exorcisms is that the devil hates humor. And I guess maybe it means, he hates being mocked or jested, whatever. Nobody likes being laughed at, right? So, you know, um, he's taunting whoever's possessing this guy, and he's like, "Well, if you're really Satan, if you say what is my name, and all this stuff." And then what's funny is then they bring in the pig that was introduced as he entered, and he's like, "All right, if you're so mighty, why don't you transfer over into this pig?" And then blam, they shoot the pig, and then it's the Pope's exorcist. It's like, what is happening? Like, that poor pig.
It's it's a cute conceit, and we'll get more into this when I talk
Mhm,
about the Friedkin documentary, but
mhm,
I'm watching this, I'm thinking, when I think of demons, I think of things that have been around literally since the beginning of
mhm.
time. They are fallen angels. They were initially created with the knowledge and power of eternity.
Yeah.
Are they really going to be that dumb? And I understand being prideful, but like it has to know that the priest is trying to coax him into this pig to,
And
basically do something to him.
who knows? We are, you and I, we're amateurs. We don't know these things, but we haven't experienced this. But I want to kind of believe that, like, maybe there's different levels of demons. It's like, maybe that's their first possession. They just kind of just kind of botching it up, and he's not doing so well. And Amort is onto him. So who knows? But
I think, well, for me, I think that requires a joke or a line of dialogue or something about, oh, you must be new, or something like that. Right
great.
when he gets into the pig, and then he,
Mhm,
right before he blows his brains out,
mhm,
he says, "Oh, you must be new to this, idiot." But because I think, as we've established, there is a language, there are certain touch points to this genre, and usually these things that take over people,
mhm.
if they're not the devil explicitly. They're very intelligent, very smart. So to see someone fall for something like this, right at the outset, it's just a bit of a head scratcher. Um, I think, and yeah, that's why I just wish the opening had been a little stronger, because I think as the movie goes along, the spirit that we mostly deal with, the self-proclaimed, I guess, king of hell,
Yeah.
which I think is different than Satan, because there are different hierarchies and all this other business. But
I forget what
uh,
name he had for himself. It was some kind of different name. Ash Medai or something.
s-
No, no,
uh,
no. That's something else. Osmodius. Yeah,
Osmodeus, yeah, is
Osmodius.
the
Yeah,
the king of hell.
yeah, yeah.
Um, yeah, yeah, we can get past the cold opening, because I certainly have. But as as we get into it, I think this is where it's kind of frustrating. And I'll go back to The Evil Dead Rise. That was a movie that is based on a series of films that were alternately, like, initially very scary,
Hmm.
and then very funny and scary and imaginative.
Yeah,
It's funny, it's at times imaginative, but it's never scary. It just, like, I don't know how hard it is to make a horror movie, even though it's 2023 and everyone's seen and done it all, that's actually scary and exciting. They It's almost made for the person who's never seen one of these movies before, and I'm certainly not that.
yeah. I mean, as odd as it sounds, I could see this being a gateway possession movie for some people. You know, if that's your thing. I mean, eh, arguably, I do feel that Talk to Me is a little bit more original as far as horror movies that have come out
Oh,
this
yeah.
year. I think you like that movie. I'm not
Oh, I
sure.
loved it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
it's
So I feel like as far as how do you scare people now in 2023, I feel like I mean, there were definitely moments in Talk to Me where I was just totally wowed and unnerved and like, whoa. I think here, may and just maybe with demon possession movies in general, it's just hard to do because they've been done so often, and it's like we have a certain expectation. Um, and this met all the expectations, but I recommended this movie just because I'm not saying this is one of the better movies of the year, but like you said, it's better than Evil Dead Rise, because I feel like it knows what it is, and it's kind of having a good time with it. Um, yeah.
you know, I agree, and the weird thing is, I don't think it did that well, but I don't think it flopped. I don't remember exactly how, what the calculus is of how expensive it was versus how it did internationally or whatever, but it definitely is set up for a sequel, because, um, after, spoiler alert again, the demon from the Spanish Inquisition is vanquished, but it turns out that on Earth there are 199 other sites
I
just like
love it.
this. They're like the portal, the places that God cannot enter,
I love it.
um, that must be, destroyed in order to prevent the end of the world. And so Father Amort and his assistant Father Escabel, who, Daniel Zavato, I don't, I feel like I've seen this actor before, maybe, but I don't know where he's from. But I thought he, particularly as the movie goes on, like at the end of the movie, I thought he was really great.
Yeah, he
But
was in It Follows and Don't Breathe and Station
okay.
11 from HBO. But yeah, yeah, he's good.
But at the end of the film, they get recruited by the Vatican to go and research these other, sites, these hundred. So there's potentially 199 more movies you can make out of this. And I initially thought, okay, this just officially became the Men in Black mass.
I love it.
Um,
I love it. And that's like I was like that was kind of like the cherry on the whipped cream and the nuts and the sundae and the hot fudge. I mean, that's it. That did it for me. I'm like, this here we have. I mean, Nick Fury might as well just show up at the end. It's like I'm getting a team together. In fact, mentioning, Matt Zoller cites his review again. He even mentioned is like the movie ends with somewhat of an Avengers initiative, you know, and I was just like, oh my god, we're doing this. This is just so silly. It's like that ending totally didn't need to happen, but it did. And I was like, all right, I'm on board for this. I mean, I know it's there. I'm sure there's not going to be a sequel, but I'm like, this would just be so funny if it like took off. And I don't
it,
know.
It would be, and here's the thing. I feel like if there were to be a sequel, I would almost like it to be like a straight up horror movie with, again, some of this, winking
Hmm.
humor elements to it, but do like really go for it, make something scary because movies can be fun, entertaining, and also scare the hell out of you. I mean,
Yeah,
look at The Exorcist, the William
yeah.
Friedkin movie. I mean, there's not a lot fun about that movie except that you want to go and have the crap scared out of you and also really think about things. I'm reading the novel by William Peter Blatty right now.
Mm.
It's my my daily routine for this month is I wake up, I read
Read the
the
Bible.
Bible, and then I read a chapter of The Exorcist,
Wow, wow.
because I'm preparing for a Page to Screen next month. But reading that book, it's terrifying. I'm not even into the part where Reagan is full on like crazy,
Hmm.
flinging things around and spitting up pea soup, but just the gradual descent into horror and talking to the medical professionals who are baffled. Even that lame ass spider walk sequence that
Hmm.
they cut out of or
Yeah.
they added back into the director's cut or whatever
Hmm.
back 20 years ago. That scene's in the book, and it's really chilling just by the one sentence tag they add at the end of it, which is basically that uh, as they backed out of the room, they realized Reagan was licking at their heels or something like that, like following them around the floor, like licking them like a spider.
Wow.
Um, yeah, it's great stuff. But I feel like that if they were to put that into a sequel and
Well,
make it really terrifying,
yeah.
and they touch on this idea of the Catholic Church. What if all the controversy and the problems that have been happening for the last 400 years are because of dark influences?
Hmm.
You could take that and tackle specific issues, maybe a little bit heavy-handed, but there's the whole famous issue of like pedophile priests. Imagine Father Amorth taking on that,
Hmm.
he and Escabel having to figure out the mystery of this and maybe put things right in the world by vanquishing that aspect of it and
Well, yeah.
like achieving world peace or harmony, bringing things back into balance by taking apart evil in all of its manifestations across a series of movies.
Or just bonding with each other and comparing notes on each other's faith and what they've learned and how they have overcome things. Because I think one of the more intriguing things about The Exorcist is this crisis of faith. That I forget his name, but yeah. Um,
Father
you
Karras?
Father Karras, yeah, Father
Yeah.
Karras has, it's just this, and that's the thing too, is like we see it a little bit of in this movie. Both of these priests, Mort and Escabel, they have their, scar tissue from their own past, and it could be sins, it could be, crisis of faith, it could be whatever, because they're human, right? And so the devil is or the demon, whatever, is going to basically expose those and bring those out into, well, I won't say the light, but into the darkness, and prey upon that. So um, that could happen. Again, in another, I don't want to say adventure, but mission, episode. Again, I don't think this there's going to be much more to this, but I think it's just kind of uh, hilariously bold to actually end the movie like this and just say, well, there's so many other different, they map it all out. And it's like, well, but we have much work to do, as his accent was kind of like very, very steady and great throughout. And I'm not saying it's spot on, but it is kind of like somewhat like the Count from Sesame Street in a way,
And
um,
there's a little Mario in there, just a
yeah, yeah,
bit, but
a little bit, yeah. I mean, better than Chris Pratt. But again, I had fun with it. I thought, the kids were fine, and the mom, played by Alex So, she's one of those actresses who's been in like who needs a break from horror movies because she's been in like way too many horror movies, but sometimes actors get stuck in that. Um,
or they choose to, I don't know, maybe
they choose to, yeah.
she's
That could
a
be her
genre
thing.
fan.
Could
Yeah.
be her thing. Yeah.
I let me
Yeah.
let me ask you about this family though, because I feel like they were given way too much. The movie seemed very divided to me. Um,
Okay.
this isn't The Exorcist where it is really about the family
Yeah.
dynamic. I feel like the focus, the thing that filmmakers really care about is the relationship between Amort and Escabel.
Mhm.
I feel like the family could have been, even more of an afterthought or a background players than they were in this movie. There was nothing more to them than the standard, okay, this is the family of the person who's been possessed, and they're all worried and fretting and infighting, and one of them gets possessed and
Yeah, I mean,
whatever.
it's not about, I mean, the movie's not called, the family that met the Pope's exorcist. It's it's the Pope's exorcist. So the most of what we get out of that family is a lot of setup and establishment. Um, we don't get really too deep into it, and I guess I was okay with that because I was just totally sick of hanging out with a family from Evil Dead Rise. So uh, I I felt like it was enough to go on, considering what we're supposed to be kind of journeying through here. That, like you said, it was more about these two different fathers, Escobar and Mort. Um, yeah, towards the end, um, where it ends with the family, again, very much, pretty much expected, of where we think it's going to go.
Yeah, I feel like the whole setup of the family, like driving up to the Abbey,
Hmm.
walking around, exploring it, here's your room, and
Yeah.
oh, what's this do? All of that could have been handled in like, a message at the Vatican to Father Amort, like, hey, there's this family that moved into this Abbey in Spain. There's weird stuff going on. Please go investigate. And then you have the entire movie be about, Amort and Escabel, and the family's just kind of there, but they're more a significant part of this movie than I think was warranted. And I don't,
I
it's
think
kind of puzzling.
it would have been fun if, like, he arrives at the Abbey and the demon possessed kid, the younger kid, just like runs out of the place like stark naked, like, ah, and the mom's like, "Oh my god, I'm so sorry. Are you Father Mort? I'm as you can see, I'm having trouble with my son." And yes, I can see, and, and the kid, the teenage daughter, still listening to uh She Sells Sanctuary on her headphones. I did like the references to some of the songs. It's like, okay, we're playing like a song from the 87, the Cults She Sells Sanctuary, and then we're playing Gone Daddy Gone from Violent Femmes, the dad's dead. Gone Daddy Gone, and then that song, We Care a Lot, Faith No More. It's like, okay, it's a little on the nose here, but um yeah, fun stuff. So the documentary, um I mean, obviously I was interested in that because of Friedkin's recent passing, but then when I realized that, okay, well, the Pope's Exorcist, which I just watched, there's some links here. Let's see what this is all about. I assume you watched it like me on Tubi, right? Or did you rent
No,
it? Or
I rented on Amazon mostly
okay.
because even though it's only an hour and 10 minutes, I didn't want to have to stop for those little ads that popped up and
Oh, those
whatever.
were
So
really refreshing. We're in the middle of an exorcism, and it's like, do you do you, do you need Viagra or whatever?
do you ever feel like someone else? No.
Yes. Do you ever feel like somebody's watching you? Yeah. Um, what did you think about that documentary? I mean, as Friedkin's swan song, as Friedkin revisiting, his most famous movie.
I don't want to speak ill of the dead, but I don't think Friedkin comes off very well in this movie.
Hmm.
As a presenter, as a documentarian, as an honest person. Um, to me, it felt, and I wrote this down in my notes, it's kind of like how Kevin Smith did. He got on the scene with Clerks and then Mallrats, Dogma, Jay and Silent Bob, all this stuff. And then he decided, I'm going to go off and do my own thing. I'm going to do Jersey Girl, Red State,
Tusk.
um, Tusk. And then it's like, because I'm an artist, I'm going to branch out and like, this is what I really care about. Unfortunately, the audience didn't care about it in the way
Yeah.
that, he needed to. So it's like, hey, let's make Clerks 3, a movie I said I'd never do. This was like, you know, Friedkin, to his credit, comes out and says, I made The Exorcist, 45 years ago. This is, 5 years back now. He's like, "And it was a phenomenon and it changed everything or whatever." I didn't really think about it until 45 years later. There's this priest and this story about this
Mhm.
exorcism. I felt like, hey, nothing I've done has really clicked in the popular imagination since. I'm still just the exorcist guy. So maybe I'll just lean into that. And
Yeah.
hey, here's a story about a real exorcism. And I filmed it, and it was just me, no lights, no crew. It's just me and my camera. And that's true, but I'll be darned if there wasn't some post-filming audio enhancements during that exorcism scene.
It's like you really want to believe the guy, and I how can you not love Friedkin? I mean, the guy's just like you could just listen to him talk forever about life and movies and stuff, and he's got his pants all the way up above his belly, and he's just like he just doesn't give a crap, and but he seems at points just genuinely interested, and it reminded me of the fact that he started out as a documentarian. So okay, are we going back to is he going back to his roots here, and what are we going to be, I it almost made me want to see some of those early documentaries that he made, what was his approach to the subjects there. um but there is a little bit of a almost kind of like a not so much of a laziness to the whole thing, but it's just like a I'm gonna go back and remember, he even went back to the steps where Father Karras is like, I'm like, all right, well, this really has nothing to do with Father Amort. It more has to do with like, here I am at the steps of the movie from 45 years ago, and blah blah
And
blah.
they're called the Exorcist steps. You know why? Because of me.
Yeah, 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 exactly. So he
It reminded me of I guess I'm just so used to when people make documentaries, unless you're Michael Moore or say Morgan Spurlock and it's more of an entertainment kind of a show, I'm used to directors narrating the documentaries, but not like standing out in front of the camera. It reminded me of like a lame ass version of Robert Stack doing unsolved
yes,
mysteries, in
that's
the
why.
2000s or something.
Mhm.
It
That's
and
what.
it doesn't work. He doesn't have that presence. I feel like he's trying to do the gravitas thing. I'm like, this would be so much better if I couldn't see you.
I have to say I give him credit for trying that, because it almost like he's so kind of earnest and also kind of full of himself. There's like it's like there's like a balance of that that's pretty impressive. And yes, he is almost doing this, Robert Stack, unsolved mysteries type thing or whatever. And I'm just like, this isn't working, but I'm still so fascinated by it. Um,
Well, it's weird because when Robert Stack would, and for those who are younger than 40, that this is a show from the 1980s. It was kind
mm,
of like real unsolved mysteries, and Robert Stack, who was in the movie Airplane, you might remember him from that. But where he would come out in like the trench coat and like the fog and the mist,
mm.
I almost feel like that was an homage to the arrival of Max von Sydow in The Exorcist.
Yeah,
If he had done something like that as the presentation for this, I probably would have forgiven him, even though
that
that
would
would have
have
been
been.
really on the nose.
Yeah, a little bit too much maybe. But basically he is, he flies himself out to Rome, and he does kind of interview and follow Father Amort. I wish that it was a little bit more about Amort than it was all kind of revolving about around this one exorcism. Now, it's an interesting subject. I forget. I think her name is like Carolyn or Caroline or
It's Christina.
Christina. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the crust of the yeah, I guess the meat of the movie is I don't know. I'm not even hungry. I don't know why I say crust and meat, but the meat of the movie is this exorcism, and in this room, her family and boyfriend and her parents are there,
And some priests, some
and
other
some
holy
other
people.
priests, and they're all, I don't know if they're there because of her or because Father Amort was arriving. There have been failed exorcism attempts with her before.
This is the
She,
ninth.
yeah, this is the ninth, and yeah, I mean, and granted, look, there was a part of me that going in cold to this, when I was watching this, I'm like, what the heck? And then later on, I thought kind of like you. I'm like, all right, Friedkin must have doctored this up later on in post, because some of the sounds almost felt like typical the kind of typical demon sounds that you hear in so many possession movies, right?
Like we saw or heard in the Pope's Exorcist,
Hmm.
that it's sort of a guttural, like
Echoey,
an echoey, yes,
reverb,
almost
yeah.
as if there's two voices, like
Hmm.
the same voice layered on top of each other
Yeah.
on two separate tracks playing at the same time.
And
Yeah.
then there's a lot of like, you have at least two or three people holding her down a lot of times when she gets agitated. At first, um, it seems like nothing's happening, and then whether through his Italian prayers or whether through him making a mockery of the situation or whatever in his own way, um she just kind of has this guttural, kind of turns into this kind of beastish person, uh and I don't know what to think. I don't know what to say about it, except like, oh, I don't know. It's like, is this person? This is the ninth attempt. Now, we also have a whole section in this movie where there's Friedkin is like kind of like playing the devil's advocate. Sorry, I had to do that. Where he talks to medical professionals, and so whether, okay, is this real or not, and is this possible? But I'm thinking as I'm watching Christina, it's like, okay, this is the ninth attempt. Are there actually people out there? And apparently exorcisms in Italy are very common, very constant for years, decades.
Hmm.
So are there people out there who just so believe that this is what's happening to them that they just kind of give into it and it becomes this chronic thing? Can it be a mental condition that it becomes this chronic thing?
Well, there was an interview with a doctor named Itzhak Fried from Tel Aviv,
Yep.
and he said people are very much context dependent. Um, you won't have let's see, you won't experience this in a person with no religious background,
Yeah.
essentially. So the idea is, if you don't believe in any of this stuff, can you be possessed?
Mm.
And there's sort of a soft consensus that, yeah, that's true, although that would seem to be i- like, why is faith the entry point?
I
if you
don't
have an
think
evil if you have an evil spirit, it should be able to, take over anybody at will.
That's a good question. I don't know if it's necessarily faith, but also culture. And I mean, obviously,
Right.
Italy, religious culture. You're growing up in it. You have decades. You have generations in families passing on stories and experiences, and so um, I think maybe sometimes it has less to do with faith and spirituality and more so of tradition and religion.
Right, but those things they tend to be intertwined. I
They
mean,
can be, but
one of
they're
the
also quite
precepts
different. Yeah.
well, but I mean, one of the precepts of religion tends to be a faith in something that cannot be explained, right?
Sure. Yeah.
So even if you don't believe it, but you're growing up in this culture, you're going to have kind of certain signposts, like you're going to have a god and a devil, and sort of the war for the spirit, or whatever, and that kind of comes with its own trappings. But yeah, there was a stat, I think, at the beginning of this doc, where it's like there are 6 million people in Italy or something, and 500,000 uh, reported
Yeah.
cases of exorcisms
Yeah.
per year,
Mhm.
which speaks to a culture that in some ways is very open to this idea. And the whole exorcism portion of it, lasts, I think, in total, probably about 20 minutes of this hour and 10-minute documentary. And there's a good, like, 10 or 12-minute stretch of just the main part of the exorcism, which, I mean, frankly, was kind of boring to me. I got the feeling that it's supposed to be like, this is the wow stuff for the audience. Like, you are actually watching a demon inside a person. Isn't this cool? I'm like, no, because I have questions.
Yeah.
First of all, Christina, when she's this is kind of funny. I think Doctor, I keep calling Doctor Father Amort would get a kick out of this. So pardon the dark humor, but when she's possessed initially, before she gets into the full throated, like, screaming and stuff,
Mhm.
she's kind of like bopping
Yeah.
around like this.
Yeah.
She looked
Yeah.
like Grace Slick rocking out to her own, like, demo record or something.
Yeah. Or somebody who's either having a seizure or going into I've seen mental patients like that. with whatever various diagnosis, maybe, yeah, it's, maybe somebody on an extreme spectrum or something of going into that rhythm thing and working in this case, working herself into it, you know.
Right, and I wondered if there were triggers or something because before the exorcism, we do get an interview with Christina, and there's some interesting stuff in there. She's a grown woman.
Hmm.
She has a boyfriend, which we find out later. But she's asked, I think Friedkin asks her about has she sought medical attention, psychiatric help, and she says, psychiatry never really worked for me, or I never really got psychiatrists never really were able to help me, and sometimes demonic possession is disguised as medical conditions. I'm thinking that's
That's what she
kind,
said. I
yeah,
forget. Okay, yeah, I forget
yeah,
that.
she said that, and to me, I'm like, all right, well, this sort of is the reverse of what people thought for thousands of years before, modern medicine and psychiatry. They
Hmm.
mistook a medical condition for demonic
Right,
possession,
right,
like
right,
someone's having seizures and talking all like loud and being violent. That could be some kind of a condition of the brain, but they're like, oh, that's evil spirits because they didn't know
right.
any better. But that was like a big red flag for me because I'm like, okay, maybe she's not possessed, but at that point I'm like, okay, I'm gonna back pocket that and see what the movie has to offer because well, kind of like wrapped around that are accounts of another exorcism.
Hmm.
There's talk about what can happen to people during an exorcism. There's one guy was talking about, yeah, I witnessed my sister. She was speaking in tongues. She was, crawling around the floor like a snake, and her stomach became like right before my eyes, completely like bloated and
Yeah,
distended. And I'm
howling
thinking,
on the
okay,
floor and everything. Yeah.
right. I'm like, okay, this is the stuff that I've seen in the movies. And then we meet Christina, and she's going to be the subject of the exorcism. Like, oh, this is going to be fascinating. I'm going to actually get to see this. No, we see a person who is going, aside from the voice thing, which could have been modulated afterwards, or if you'll notice, it was just Friedkin in the room with his camera. And there were certain points when she got really loud. There was like that hot mic scenario where
Hmm.
some of the other audio in the room was like kind of crackling. I'm like, maybe that contributed to the
Yeah.
double audio in some cases, but there was a bit too much to the exorcism ceremony.
Hmm.
There were two levels too far. One, there's the exorcism, which me just watching it, having seen a bunch of these movies, having my expectations set by this documentary, I'm
And
like,
this director. Yeah.
yes, and this director, I'm like, I'm not convinced. There's nothing out of the ordinary here that I couldn't
Hmm.
see. Like you said, if I went to, probably visit a mental hospital, and that's no slight against people who have like
Yeah.
illnesses. I'm just saying it's not something that strikes me as supernatural. Later in the documentary, they're like, oh, and this was also the occasion to your question earlier about why are there so many people in the room. It was coincidentally on this day, it was Father Amorth's 91st
Birthday.
birthday. And Christina, okay, they exorcised the demon from her for the ninth time. Within, there's some editing, so I don't know how long exactly they were in the room, but maybe it was a couple hours. In film time, it felt like 20 minutes. They got it out of her. This other account that we'd listened to, they're like, oh, yeah, sometimes, like with my sister, it took 8 months to get this thing out of her. We're going to get to see the version that was conveniently taken care of in an afternoon. And by the way, she snaps out of it. The demon completely leaves her, and she's sitting there like smiling and laughing.
Yeah.
Everyone's like, hooray. I'm like, are you kidding me? A
Hmm.
supernatural entity just left your body, and now it's time to break out the cake and ice cream.
Yeah.
But then they go a step even further, and Friedkin masterfully plants these, he separates these out of the course of his movie because towards the end-ish, we'll call it the third act of this
Hmm.
documentary,
Hmm.
which is weird. They show the party, and it's like, oh, by the way, Christina's father is a huge fan of Father Amort. Wouldn't it be great if he were blessed? So he sits down in this chair that Christina was sitting in. And then I noticed something very odd. Christina is sitting to the side of her father, and a person who had been restraining her during the exorcism, he comes over to her and wraps his arms around her very awkwardly, almost
Yeah.
like he's got her in a hold.
Almost like a headlight. Yeah.
Right. And then Father Mort starts blessing Christina's dad.
Hmm.
And then Friedkin says, and then out of nowhere and without warning, the demon returns. I'm like, without warning, the guy goes and puts her in this
Yeah,
convenient
what
headlock
was
to
the point of
restrain her
that?
from right. And then it, has its way with her. They vanquish it again, and then cut to this very bizarre coda to the whole Christina situation.
Yeah,
Father Amort got a message to meet her and her boyfriend in this church. Apparently, she had been possessed again for the
way
10th
outside
time
of Rome.
outside of Rome. She'd been possessed for a 10th time. That's not true. It was technically 11th time because the 10th time was at the birthday party, the second possession, whatever, right?
Yep.
Friedkin, according to this story, they've got all these establishing shots of this church that they, were supposed to meet at. And he's like, I got a call or some kind of signal that she was having an episode inside the church. So I ran in. I didn't take my camera, but I'm going to describe to you what I saw. I'm like,
No. No.
okay. When I went in there, and at this point, when he's telling the story of what happened in that church, the visuals get all crazy. We've got these ghastly images of Christina from the exorcism that we saw before with this blue filter and these swirly,
Right.
like, distortions, up close pictures of the crucifix and swirling around a church, and everything's all blue and scary music and loud demon like noises.
And we actually like go
Friedkin's
into the supposed church, but it feels like a different time and not the actual event. And it's like,
right.
okay.
And what Friedkin is describing is like, I went in there and she was completely out of her mind. It was terrifying. She was flying across the floor while sitting in a plastic chair, dragging her boyfriend around and flinging his body all over this place. I'm like,
Dude.
no, I don't believe you.
Yeah. I mean, it's almost embarrassing to include that in the movie.
Yeah.
It's like, what are you doing? Why would you think that we would believe that?
He films everything else
Yeah.
at the one time.
Mhm.
And he's like, and he said, and this is again more the egotism thing. He said, and the demon kept yelling at me, "We want the footage. Give us the footage." I'm like, huh?
What? Yeah. It's like, yeah. What's the demon gonna do with the footage?
I don't know.
I don't know.
So yeah, it's frustrating. The one part I thought was really interesting was one of the it was a bishop or some higher ranking person from Los Angeles that Friedkin interviews, and he's talking about like I would never
I
want
like that
to.
guy. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, I would never want to meet a possessed person, encounter the devil, none of that stuff. And Friedkin's like, why? You're blessed. You're on the side of God. And he's like, yeah, but there's different levels to faith and the way you encounter these things. And Friedkin just doesn't quite seem to get it. And maybe that's, I don't know if he was never spiritual or if he's only quasi spiritual, whatever. But if you think about the nature of what the devil or even a demon is, kind of like what we talked about before, this is a supreme intelligence that was created by God to serve God at the beginning
Uh-huh.
of before the
Right.
beginning of time, and things went south and now it's turned bad. And even based on popular culture and myth and everything, they're very intelligent. They know everything about you. They can twist things and all that stuff. I wouldn't. I have faith.
Mhm.
I have questions and everything, but I wouldn't want to encounter that either. I think
No.
it's kind of arrogant to say it's almost like an ant deciding it's going to get into a debate with a Secretary of State or something like
Well,
that.
yeah,
Like,
it's also like, would I want to challenge God? It's like, no. I mean, I um yeah, I was kind of wondering if Friedkin was putting on an act about that because maybe he was playing into the uh just the conceptions that people have about a man of faith or a man of the cloth or whatever you want to call him, that just because you have that pedigree that you are blessed or have some kind of supernatural powers or whatever, that you should be able to conquer, or at least approach any challenging situations like this. um I mean, I think he was probably the guy that he interviewed there in Los Angeles, probably the most realistic thing about the why can't I say it? Documentary. Um, um, yeah, because I mean, I totally agreed with him. It's just like, you know what? You could be a man of faith, but you could also be a realist and say, you know what? I draw the line there. and I'm cool with that. It's like,
Well, the other thing, and it's kind of an interesting idea, is I don't know that is meeting a demon, is encountering the devil, is that in some way a form of cosmic cheating? Again, if you're of the, the Christian persuasion and dealing with this kind of belief system, because it is supposed to be based on faith. Like you
mhm,
turn yourself over to believe in, the death and the resurrection, all that stuff. But it is a big leap because science, history, all the, the retellings of things, and y- there are several dozens of religions throughout time. How do you know which is the right one?
right.
You have to commit yourself to believing this. Part of that is you believe in God and the devil. If the devil actually shows up, then by default, hopefully, that God is real. So then there's like no test. It's like a cheat sheet. I don't have
Hmm.
to have faith because now I know that if I don't act, well and all this stuff, that I'm going to hell. And you know,
Yeah.
I'm probably not getting my point across
No, I mean
as
it's
well
a
as I could, but
it's a tricky thing. I mean, because it's not one or the other. You got to take all of it into consideration. Yeah, you can't if you experience grief, then you also, when joy comes around, you have to embrace that to feel the whole balance of it all, of emotions. And spiritual warfare, if you want to call it, is the same kind of thing. You can't just believe in one thing and not the other. You can't believe in heaven and not hell. You can't, it's like, I mean, you can, but it's like you're not seeing the big picture.
right, but it's almost like if you don't believe in anything until the devil himself shows up and, gives you a vision of your internal damnation,
Mm,
if that's what it takes to get you to follow
sure.
God, it's
Yeah.
almost like, well, you didn't believe in me until I showed you proof that the opposite is true. That kind of sucks.
Well, it's also kind of biblical. There were
Oh,
a lot of people in the Bible who were that way, and they needed very hard physical evidence to be convinced.
oh
Um,
yeah,
yeah.
that's the fascinating thing about reading scripture is it's I haven't even gotten to the New Testament yet, but it's just like a series of do-overs. I mean, I would say it's repetitive, except it's kind of amazing that people keep getting these chances and they keep screwing it up and God has to
I,
start over again.
I'm curious. Are you starting from the beginning and going all the way through, or are you? Are you?
Yeah.
I know that when some people read the Bible all the way through, they do bits of Old Testament and bits of New, but you're going all the way through, huh?
I started at the beginning. I'm on like page 770. I'm in Daniel right now.
Okay.
And that's another fascinating thing is, I grew up, I was raised Catholic. I was an altar boy the whole,
Hmm.
bit,
Hmm.
but I never really read scripture. And I always had this conception of the Bible as like the two halves. There's the Old Testament and the other half is the New Testament. I'm reading it's the New International Version, I
Yeah.
guess, but
Yeah.
it's like 800 pages of the Old Testament and Jesus shows up in the last like 200 pages. And that doesn't even that includes Revelation. So it's it's like it's not this half and half thing that I've been led to believe. And also that there are other religions, like Judaism, they
Sure.
don't cotton to the whole thing of like the death and resurrection. They're like Old Testament. I'm like, we have that much in common. It's just that little sliver of like 150 pages, exaggerating, between these two completely different, worldviews and approaches to life and the afterlife.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
No, for sure. For sure. Very
But
fascinating.
yeah, so yeah, we're kind of off into the weeds here, but I mean these movies are about
Yeah, we're not too
spirituality
far
and
off, so
right. But it's a fascinating discussion and I liked watching I didn't enjoy The Devil and Father Amort because of all the reasons like but
sure.
I felt like it was a great way for me to sharpen what I believe, why I believe certain things and really have that questioning. I hate to be the doubting Thomas because we know how that, all ended. But it is just like a matter of yeah, I believe, but I don't believe in that.
Yeah.
Just because you're presenting me with something that's supposed to be evidence of spirituality or the afterlife or whatever, that's great, but I don't have to believe in your version of it.
And it made me wonder, okay, if I don't believe what I'm watching here because of my life experience and everything that I've seen before, and various other reasons, what would make me believe in that? It's like, I don't know. It's hard to say.
Well, it's just it goes into, I mean, we could talk an hour about the nature of evil, but I think a lot about hell, and the popular conception is, fire and lake of fire and brimstone and demons poking at you, and or hellraiser or something, but
Sure.
it could be something, cuz hell is, it's the absence of God. So if you just imagine, say, and basically if you go to Dante, like, abandon hope, all ye who enter here,
Hmm.
it's the complete absence of change or hope from a bad situation.
Sure.
So if you imagine, like, you wake up in the middle of the night and you're on pins and needles because your leg fell asleep, and you're like, this really sucks. But in 15 minutes, if I roll around a bit, I'll feel better and I'll fall back to sleep and I'll be peaceful. Imagine that feeling
All the
never,
time. Yeah.
ever going away. It doesn't have to be fire. It doesn't have to be being stabbed over and over. It can just be extreme discomfort or boredom or something with no hope of escape. So when I think about evil, I don't necessarily need demons possessing people and throwing bodies across the room. It could be something as simple as planting the seeds of doubt in someone who has the ability to change the world for the better, but they don't believe in themselves. So they never share these ideas. They never help anybody.
Yeah.
And, they always say, like, oh, this person could have been the next Hitler. What if this person could have been the next, Gandhi? It's all it's all evil in my mind.
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, I guess as far as what would make me believe this documentary a little bit more. I don't know. Maybe if Friedkin wasn't involved. uh, eh, eh, because I don't feel like talking about evil. I don't feel like something as powerful evil as, say, like whatever possessed Christina. I don't think something that powerful would let a documentary like this take place. You know what I mean? Um, but
Or or it would, and would be more persuasive to, because it is kind of the idea, and this comes across in the Pope's Exorcist, of like, what do these things want? Why take over somebody? I think this came across in the documentary, or maybe it was in the Pope. It all kind of blends together because I watched both these things earlier
mhm,
today. But the whole idea of the devil or demon can't take over someone's spirit, they can take over someone's body. The
yeah,
only way evil can win over someone's soul is if they relinquish their own, agency through committing sin, right?
right.
Which is a fascinating distinction. Um, but I feel like if Friedkin were involved, but was maybe a subject of the movie along with Dr. Amort, someone interviewing him, like, what do you believe, William Friedkin? What was your background? What brought you to
Hmm.
this? Did you think about any of this stuff while you were making The Exorcist, or in the almost five
Right.
decades afterwards? Because he almost has this, he's playing up the devil's advocate to almost an insanely golly gee shucks degree. I'm like, have you thought about any of this in the last half century?
I mean, you think that he must have, or else why is he doing this? You know?
Yeah. But I don't have any insight into this, Robert Stack-esque character.
Yeah.
I'm just kind of annoyed by him, and
I
I
mean,
wish there were more to his movie.
there's so many other movies that he could be revisiting. Like, I mean, he's the guy who directed Nick Nolte and Blue Chips, but he's not revisiting that basketball drama. But
Wait, is that true? I
it
didn't
is
realize that was
true.
a freak. Wow.
Oh boy. When he died, I looked at all his filmography and I'm like, whoa, 90s, what happened in the 90s? Uh
Well, any closing thoughts on either of these movies?
I mean, it's on Netflix, and it's, I think, Pope's Exorcist is like number 10 in the top 10 right now. I simply out of curiosity, because it's like it's one of those things that I don't think a lot of people were going to go pay to leave their house to pay to go see it in the theater, but now that it's on Exorcist, not so much for Crow completists, but I would say if you're curious about what Crow's doing in this, as I was, it's worth checking out, because it a lot of what he does is really kind of a hoot.
Yeah, it's a good it's a solid performance, I think, in a movie that has, peaks and valleys. I think in Zoller Seitz's review also, I'm gonna link that down below
You
along
should,
with
yeah.
his because he also reviewed the
Did he?
Friedkin documentary.
Oh, did he? I didn't
If
catch that.
you reread the Pope's Exorcist one, he actually
Yeah.
hyperlinks
Oh,
to a
does he?
review of
Okay.
that. He gives the both movies 2 stars,
Yeah.
and he's pretty much spot on, I think,
Yeah.
in his assessment and kind of in line with a lot of what we're talking about here. Um, I completely lost my train of thought. But,
I'd give it 2.5 just for the Avengers Initiative at the end, but
yes. But yeah, I'll link both of those,
yeah,
down below because they are really, stellar pieces. You can see why he's the EIC at rogerebert.com.
for sure.
Um, but, yeah, check it out. It's pretty good. Oh, I remember what I was gonna say. He mentioned, like, if people are gonna watch this movie, they'll probably if you've seen it, you might go back and watch a few of the scenes where you've got, like, the Father Amorth zingers,
Oh,
but
totally.
You're not gonna be going back and watching the
Woohoo!
possessed kid stuff, right? It's like because 'cause you've seen all that. You
Yeah,
haven't seen what Russell Crowe does with this character.
right. And I think I shared with you so many of those tweets that Russell Crowe is retweeting because it seems like it's mainly coming from Japan, but all this fan art of Father Amort, not the actual Father Amort, but Crow as Father Amort, and it's usually him on the red
On a
scooter
scooter.
with the
Yep.
sunglasses and the hat, and I'm like, I love this. This is so how bizarre to have this take off as fan art.
And, there's something, that is oddly thematic about the movie because, if the devil does hate jokes, he probably hates memes even more.
For sure.
And there is just something so regardless of what you think of the movie, there's just something and even if you don't know anything about Father Amort, but these drawings, this fan art is so fun and light and expressive that it
Mhm.
just makes you feel kinda happy, and I guess that's the antidote to
I,
to absolute evil.
I mean, honestly, if it doesn't take off as it's not going to take off as sequels or anything, but if it can, wind up as a manga comic or a comic series, I mean, I'm all on board.
Oh, yes. I
Mhm.
would yeah. If that happens, we'll do a special, comics, comics review of it.
That's
It's
right.
gonna
That
be
would be
amazing.
awesome. That would be awesome.
Alright, David, David Fowley of Keeping It Real. What do you got coming up? Anything that you wanna promote or talk about, plug?
More after hours next month on September 11th. I'll be discussing Kelly Reichardt's new movie, or latest movie, Showing Up. Um, that's in at the Tivoli Theater in Downers Grove. That's a suburb of Chicago. So that's coming up September 11th, Monday.
All right, cool. I'll link to that info for the After Hours Film Society website down below, and
Cool.
folks can get tickets and go see David give a talk and watch an awesome movie.
There you go.
Actually, it's not a talk; it's an audience kind of discussion
Participation. Yeah,
after. Right?
discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
hmm Cool, man. Well, thank you for recommending both these movies. I had very different reactions, but I had reactions to at least
Yeah.
one of them, and I think
I mean, I'm
I
kind of
like
on board
the
with you.
yeah, but, like, during the course of this conversation, I feel like I have more of an appreciation for the highs of The Pope's
Mm,
Exorcist than I
mhm.
did the lows, because I think I started off by saying I didn't really have much of a reaction. I don't think that's true. I think I reacted, but it's coming out more than I'm talking to you about
And
it.
again, you came to it differently than I did because we watched these in reverse. So
Yeah,
I can understand where you're coming from. Yeah.
awesome. All right, sir. Well, thanks so much. Take care, and we'll be talking about something else, maybe even next week. I don't know if we might equalize these conversations that we've been having.
We could.
Maybe,
We could.
maybe,
Might be
yeah.
another yeah. uh, yeah,
Do you
exactly.
remember do you remember,
I I
Equalizer 2,
I do.
how I couldn't get away from the fact that Pedro Pascal played the bad guy in that movie before I even knew who he really was,
Mhm.
certainly before The Mandalorian, and I thought that he looked like Justin Trudeau.
And he did.
My
Oh
god.
my gosh. The only
So,
thing I've heard about this new movie is that it's just a lot bloodier, and I think it's also in Italy. There we go.
yeah,
We're back.
yes.
Have to use our passports.
Dude, and at the end, Denzel Washington is up against it, and he has to call upon Russell Crowe as Father
That would
Mort
be
to
awesome. Oh man, that would be amazing.
Ugh. All right. Well, until next time, whenever that is, whatever that is, thank you very much, sir, and take care.
Thank you.